Welcome to the Decoding Story-Based Marketing Podcast, where we help businesses create killer messaging that unlocks their marketing potential. In today's episode, we discuss how to balance using your judgment and intuition with investing in measurement and process. I'm your host, Kristin, and I'm joined by my Decoded co-founder, Annie, and we are very happy to be joined by Ben Hanzo, founder at SetPiece, a product strategy consulting firm. Hi, guys.
Hello.
How are we doing today?
Doing all right. Yeah, it's chilly. We're all wearing sweatshirts, like feeling very fall. It's good.
Yes, we're in Southern California, so it's like 72 degrees, which means hoodie time.
Sweatshirts.
It's a lovely 41 in the mornings if you're up early.
That's true. Yeah, it's chilly for real in the mornings.
Yeah. Well, guys, a lot going on in the world right now. And I find when there are times that I feel particularly stressed or strapped, the place that I want to go is my dinner table. I love intense times thinking about what are the wonderful meals that I am excited to eat. So the holidays are upon us, you guys. I am very curious. Do you guys have any favorite dishes that you are excited about, whether they're family recipes or things that you love to make every year? What kind of meals are we excited about right now?
Well, I will tell you one of my favorite nighttime activities when I can't quite sleep. I don't really do social media, so I'm not in a very scroll habit, on my phone. But I do love looking through the New York Times cooking app and looking through all of their very, very many collections. So this is very true. I find that to be a good source of stress, not even at the kitchen table, but just thinking about what I'm going to make at the kitchen table. I love cooking so much. And sometimes for me, cooking can become the chore. I got to get dinner on the table midweek. And so the holidays, it just always feels like a celebratory, fun, nurturing activity in cooking. So I like all of it. But one thing that I've tried to do every year around Christmas is make homemade English muffins. That's become one of my favorite things. I've done it every year. And it's this really fun activity where obviously you make the dough, you kind of have to let it sit, it rises, and then you cook it on a cooktop and then you bake it. And so it's just this fun ritual of multiple steps. We love English muffins, and it's not a thing that you would normally bake on a weekend. So that's kind of our Christmas Day tradition at this house.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. What about you, Ben?
I love Thanksgiving. Definitely one of my favorites of the holidays. And I potentially unsurprisingly have fairly strong opinions about what should be there, how it should be prepared. And so stuffing is a thing that I have a very particular recipe that I have been making for a pretty decent amount of time at this point. And yeah, I'm very excited to make that. We're actually going to be traveling until Thanksgiving Day. So I'm going to make it ahead and deliver it to our family member who's hosting so that they can just have it to take out of the freezer when the day arrives.
That's amazing. And Kristin and I are both, can you please share that recipe with us now, please? Thank you.
Yep,
okay, great.
For sure.
I'm curious. I'm actually very curious. What is the magic in this stuffing?
Sausage.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
This is not a food podcast, but I would love to spend 20 minutes talking with you because I also have very strong opinions about specific sausage in stuffing. Very interested in that.
Wow.
Kristin,
Okay.
how about you?
All right. Spin off food.
Yeah, we could just do a food after show.
After show. Perfect.
And food is what brought Annie and I together in our friendship. So
Yes.
this is fun to talk about.
Yes.
If I could have a whole table of side dishes, I would be very, very happy. And so I'm on the same plane here in terms of the stuffing situation, the mashed potato situation across the board. That's what I'm very excited about. My thing that I love making in the holidays is a cranberry orange walnut bread.
Yes, it's so good,
As
Kristin.
we cross into Thanksgiving to December, I'm making that every weekend. So we'll be making some batches. of
And
that.
when are you coming over?
Just planning that out.
Just calendar it out, or
for our next recording session. So,
lovely,
yeah.
lovely.
Okay. Anyway, so food podcast TBD. Now let's talk about the topic at hand. So we're talking today about intuition, about judgment, and balancing that with the need for processes, measurement, documentation, all of that. And I find that those are often two sides of the same coin. They're very important. Now, this is going to be a fun podcast because I, with little advanced knowledge, know that Annie and Ben are coming at this from different places. So this is going to be a really fun conversation. So Annie, I would love to hear from you. I know that anytime we feel strongly about a topic, that's usually informed by an experience or by something that has happened or something you saw. I'm curious, where do you come down on the judgment, intuition versus measurement processes, and why.
Yeah, this is, I'm so excited we're having these conversations. Literally one that I wanted to have for a long time. And I think it originated for me, my opinions, my experience with it at a startup that I was working with several years ago. So this was early on in my tech sort of startup experience. And I had a wonderful opportunity to join one of the first cohorts of a professional development group called Reforge. So I don't know if folks are familiar with Reforge. They've changed and evolved a lot. But originally at the time, it was a cohort-based kind of professional development group for folks in tech that were kind of working in the different areas between product, marketing, customer success, and helping to instill frameworks in the way that we could actually build plans, build growth plans, et cetera. So I loved my experience working with Reforge. I had 6 different weeks, so we went through tons of different curriculum, met some of like my closest friends and colleagues in the tech space now. And I was so psyched after that to go into my company and start to implement some of these frameworks and some of these, systems that we learned. One of them, at the time, I was responsible for customer success. And so one of these frameworks was about how to identify your activation metric. And so the concept between an activation metric is what is the action or series of actions that you need new users to hit that will kind of ensure the highest likelihood that they will become very active in the product and stick around for the long term. So this was like, within 7 days doing these 3 steps within the product. It's kind of determining that. And so what this framework really was all about is let's look back at the data, your historical data of product usage, and see if you can find a correlation between certain actions within the product in a certain period of time and likelihood that they will have the highest LTV or, kind of the lowest level of churn. I was so freaking excited, right? I came in, I set up all these meetings. I brought in our data person. I brought in other people from the team. They were really excited about it. And so we all went into this exercise with a ton of momentum. But as soon as our data specialist, our head of data at the company started to try to pull this information, there were just some blockers that he hit. And so I remember we had the follow-up conversation where he was going to share his findings. He showed up and he said, here are some things that we found, but I couldn't holistically look across all product usage. So the research was null. And I was so frustrated because I thought, hey, we have some indicators of if you do these things in the product, you'll be really successful. So no, let's go with that. That is enough to move with. We've never had anything like this, which could revolutionize our stickiness as a product, our customer success and onboarding. And so I think that was the first moment where I realized like there are people and functions that rely so heavily on measurement and data and process, and it needs to be complete and it needs to be whole and 100%. And I was like, that was just a big eye opener for me because I was ready to go even if we were at 30% of the research and data that we needed. And so as I wrap up this story, we all worked for a founder who at least instilled in me a principle that I think about all the time, which is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And that was an experience where I realized, oh, that's what the fuck this actually means. I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. And we never ended up making movement on that. And it's still one of my biggest regrets as a leader that I didn't push it forward, even if we didn't have everything measurement and process. So it's just, that has been a very influential experience on me in tech.
Ben, curious about you and your perspective on this, because that's such a helpful story to take a look at where it got in the way from actual progress. So Ben, curious for you.
Yeah, I've worked across a bunch of companies that have come at this from really different angles. I would say what I've probably seen the most are companies that have made it to where they are by leveraging their founder's intuition and understanding the problem space. And there is a limit to that. And it is very tricky to navigate moving from a cadence of the intuition that got us from 0 to 1 and the quick iteration and the, like, to be honest, like mostly just like add into a space of like, okay, well, we've gotten broad enough from a product perspective and we have to start saying no to things. So what are we basing that off of? And how are we evaluating those decisions when we make them so that we're also building the muscle to say, was that a good choice or a bad choice, rather than was the founder listened to or not? And it's very tricky in the product world in particular because it also pulls in your risk tolerance as a team, as a leader, and as a company. Because if you make an intuitive decision that isn't based on data and it doesn't work out, that can be really tough. So I think a lot of people look to data to de-risk their personal decision making rather than creating teams where folks have safety and we're able to say, okay, here's what we know, here's where we're trying to get to, and we're going to make this decision. And we all understand that this is the level of certainty we have or the level of uncertainty we have. And that really calibrates to where we are as a business.
So Kristin and I have had this experience before that I'm so curious, Ben, your thoughts and how you would approach this. So, big part of what we do and what we offer are kind of messaging and positioning strategy sessions. So we'll sit down with a group and we'll really dig into how do you message as a brand? How should you be positioned as a brand? And so we'll have these conversations with companies who need it so desperately. They come to us, they say, we need this. We don't know how to explain what we do. People are getting confused. And then we start kind of planning out the project or planning out the session. You know what? Actually, I think we need to wait. We need to gather more data before we do it. We say, okay, that tracks. Let us know when you're ready. We check back in 6 months later. Oh, no, we still haven't kind of found the data. We don't really know what to do. And so I found that there's this probably good instinct sometimes that people pause and say, oh, I need to build a process, or I need to gather the data first. But then so often do I see that fizzle out because maybe there isn't a muscle around understanding what type of data or measurement or experimentation process needs to be built. They've never done it before. They don't have access to data. So have you experienced that, Ben? Like that idea of like, let's pause and gather the stuff, but then it just fizzles. And like, what do you do with that?
Yeah. So a lot of what I've worked on with folks is how do you build this muscle, where these are companies that have not had this as a practice, and it can feel either overwhelming or like it's going to slow them down. And generally, I find that what has been the most successful is actually defining what we talk about as data much more broadly so that we can start with qualitative. Meaning, let's go talk to people and let's develop some hypotheses that we think we can measure, be it on the marketing side or on the product side. And then that also narrows the scope of the work we need to do to measure. So rather than like going and paying a lot of money for Mixpanel and like shoving it in every corner of the product that we may not know whether or not we care about, we pick some very specific places. Or, again, I don't want to get too into the technical details, but like we pick some very specific facts we'd like to know. And then we can go figure out how to know those facts, even if it's as a one-off, right? Like we can go ask an engineer to do a thing one time or whatever. Rather than saying, well, we need to invest in a whole system here, we can say like, we can self-assess and say, okay, here's where we are today. And here's where we think we want to get to. So let's start out with this small thing. And sometimes even just the practice of having the conversation, like I've seen this, of having the conversation of, cool, we think we want to do this thing. What would success look like for that thing? And I've seen people be like, we've never done this before. And be like, okay, cool. What do we think success would look like? And then we kind of go from there.
So the listeners, viewers, people can't see us. The listeners couldn't see, but I just like raised my hands in a hallelujah when, Ben, you talked about the idea of like qualitative data and qualitative inputs, because I think so often that there's almost like a deputizing of qualitative data as valuable that needs to happen, that it doesn't have to be to make a big decision about, who your ICP is or how you're marketing to certain people or how you're building a product. It doesn't all have to be exclusively quantitative, that there can be some qualitative inputs that you say, what do we believe? Can we validate that by having some conversations or by looking at what we have available to us, and that has an important place in making decisions, in building processes, in moving forward. And I just think that is so important because you don't always have access to quantitative information. You can't always measure on the upfront. And so maybe it's like, What are some of the hypotheses? What are our beliefs? What are our intuitions? Can we validate that a little bit? And if we can't measure and look back now, let's at least set some measurements and benchmarks for a month, a year from now to look back and measure in that way. And so I just think that is so valuable and like almost a middle ground here of the validity of qualitative data and in making big decisions for a company and how you're building your go-to-market plan. And that measurement can happen after you've launched a thing. That doesn't have to block you from launching something.
I like that too, because it's not saying we have to reject intuition. We have to reject, we have to reject this. It's like, no, let's merge it and think about how do we back this up with data? How do we test it out and validate it and then make sure it works? So it's not like we have to choose one camp over the other camp. So I'm curious, guys. Let's say you talk to somebody and they do not have access to the data. Think back, Annie, to your experience. We can't access this data that we need to make these really informed decisions. Where do people start? I think we've just kind of got to start talking about that. But how would you advise people here?
Yeah, so to get very, very tactical, if you are building software, that software has a database. To use one of my favorite
Period.
to use one of my favorite quotes, there is always money in that banana stand. Right?
Yes.
And you may need some support to be able to query that database. You may need help from engineering. There's really great open source tools that are available that are very straightforward to get set up. Honestly, the LLMs write very excellent SQL at this point. So it's fairly accessible to folks who are somewhat technical or are interested in learning to start writing SQL queries. There's some guardrails you want to put here so that you don't knock over your production environment, but like any good engineering folks should be able to do that with you. And that can carry you a very long way. And in a lot of ways, I was actually just talking about this with a colleague who's a data person. It's much more approachable to start from there because there's much less risk of bloat. If you jump right into like, oh, we're going to put in heap or we're going to put in pendo or we're going to do like, first of all, it's very easy to do those drop-in JavaScript things, but all of a sudden you're just awash in data that may or may not be useful to you, rather than making explicit decisions about what you care about and trying to get it from where you can get it.
I love that. And that kind of just got me thinking a little bit from a marketing perspective. I mean, it is a total crapshoot around whether we come in and help a company and they have like a very sophisticated setup of HubSpot, or if they have nothing, right? And so this becomes a big challenge of like, well, how are we marking success? How are we actually evaluating efficacy? And so what I like to say is, whatever you have access to, even if you can't see the whole of how people are moving through your buyer journey or how completely effective your marketing campaigns are in finding somebody at the top of the funnel and moving them to a sales call, look for directional cues that things are moving in the way that you want them to. If all you have access to is Google Analytics, okay, let's look from a monthly perspective and see directionally, are we seeing greater traffic? Are we seeing, people spending longer on each page? Are people looking at more than one page? I find that, again, if you look at this, those are quantifiable metrics, but you have to kind of tell a more qualitative story around them because you may not have access to all of the information to truly make like super solid inferences from it. But I think look directionally to make sure, are things moving in the direction that gives you the greatest sense that you are successful? And that takes some intuition, that takes some good judgment, but you can also just leverage what you've got. So whatever inputs there are, even if it feels really thin, look for directional patterns, and that is going to get you a lot further than being stuck saying, we don't have information, we don't have data, we can't measure anything.
Brilliant. Parting thoughts. What do you say? There's a company that's relied very heavily on intuition and judgment, and it's gotten them to a solid place. But we know it's time to maybe make the jump and start integrating some other things. What are some final words that you would say to those types of companies?
I always just start with what are your goals for the business? Which it just feels, it's like you have to start from there.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Mm-hmm. What do we care about? Are we focused on growth? Are we focused on retention? Like what problems are we trying to solve for the business? And then, then we can do a gap analysis essentially and say, okay, well, what do we need to know to more effectively go after those goals? So that's where you start. And it might point you in many directions, right? You may point you to more MarTech type investments because it's like, okay, we really need to understand what's happening on folks' journey as they get here. Or it may point you more to product analytics, which is like, we're doing great getting people here. They're not converting. They're churning out. We don't totally know why. Or we have so much we're considering in the backlog and we don't have a good framework to narrow it down. And so we need to start getting some rigor around how we do that.
Yeah. I mean, we all laughed at that moment, but joking aside, the number of situations I think that we have all been in when trying to build something, campaign, product, whatever it is, and there are no preset objectives, goals, what we're really shooting for. I mean, that happens all the time. It's constant. So hilariously, I would respond in the exact same way and say like, okay, what is it that we are actually trying to accomplish? Why are we doing this thing? And I will tell you, almost universally, when posing that question, there isn't an immediate answer. So by starting with, okay, what is our goal? And I like to really look at both, like, quantifiably, what are we trying to do? Increase trials, increase leads, better convert. But then also like, what is the objective? What's the thing that we are going to focus on to move that needle? And, there are a variety of different ways, to your point, Ben, that you can get input on that. But first and foremost, why are we doing this? What is the goal? What's the business outcome that we're trying to drive? And I just believe if that is the muscle that everyone can build, then things will kind of fall into place. So hilariously, a way less contentious episode. Was going to be in the beginning. We jinxed that one. But Kristin, you set it up so perfectly. Two sides of the same coin. You have to be able to use judgment and intuition. You have to know when you need to put measurement, data, process in place. And so it's actually just finding the right way to balance that.
Basically, I just want you guys one on each shoulder all the time.
Wait, brilliant. Which one's the angel and which one's the devil, Kristin?
That's TBD for the next episode. We'll see. Okay, well, thank you guys. That was a brilliant conversation. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for the Decoding Story-Based Marketing Podcast. If this was helpful, please subscribe, leave us a rating. And for more information on Decoded Strategies, visit decodedstrategies.com, or you can connect with us on LinkedIn. We will talk to you soon.